Hey, Changemaker! Welcome to Learning for Good, the only podcast that teaches nonprofit leaders how to leverage training to drive performance, improve capacity, and fuel their mission impact. Do you ever feel like your nonprofit is growing, but your people just aren't keeping up? Or like you're fixing the same problems over and over? Do you wonder how to build confident, capable staff who know how to lead, not just execute? If we haven't met yet, I'm Heather, and I know how hard it can feel to get people to do what's expected of them. Trust me, I have 3 kids. I've tried telling people what to do and how. I've tried the traditional training approaches, and I realized that just doesn't work. And that's when I started researching what does work. Now, I help mission-driven leaders use learning to drive performance, build capacity, and make change that lasts. And I'm sharing it all on this podcast. So block your calendar, turn off your Teams or Slack chat, and let's dive in. It's Learning for Good. I'm coming off the Learning for Good Summit, which we hosted in July. The whole summit revolved around what it means to be strategic. And the discussions were amazing. We didn't talk about learning objectives or delivery methods. In fact, I'm not sure the word training came up at all. We talked about relationships and influence, the competence to speak up, to ask powerful questions, to advocate for ourselves and our work. And this makes me so happy. I believe learning and development is uniquely positioned to make a difference in each nonprofit. We see organizational strategy. We work cross-functionally. We empathize with the people in our organization. We are capable of creating change, and it's inspiring. But I also recognize that isn't always the case. Many times we fall back into reactive mode. It's what others expect of training. It's comfortable and familiar, but something gets missed when we stay reactive. There's a cost involved. And that's what I explored on a recent LinkedIn Live with Kamaria Scott, Rachel Platt, and Yogi Mueller. So I'm bringing that conversation to you on the podcast today. What happens when learning is reactive? What's the cost? And how do we fix it? Let's dive in. It's Learning for Good. All right. It looks like we are live. I am super excited to be joined by all of these very talented professionals today. Each of us brings kind of a different lens, a different perspective related to learning and development, related to the people function. And so I think it's going to be a really fun conversation for us to have and hear each of those perspectives. If you have been around my LinkedIn page for a while, you know that we've been talking a little bit recently about being strategic in learning. I, for one, believe that learning can be and should be a strategic lever within any organization. And unfortunately, I think oftentimes we end up being more reactive than strategic. And so today I wanted to kind of explore what is the hidden cost of reactive learning? What is the opportunity that we're missing? What happens when we don't operate at this level? And just kind of go a little bit deeper and hear from each of you since we all bring slightly different perspectives to the table. So I'm going to open us up with one question, which is when you hear the phrase reactive learning, what comes to mind? When you answer, if you wouldn't mind, go ahead, introduce yourself as well. And Yogi, I'll start with you.
Thank you, Heather. Wonderful to be here. Yogi Mueller out of Orlando, Florida with Craft Leadership. And when I hear the word reactive learning, I hear grinding rusty cogs and wheels coming to a grinding halt, struggling to move forward. It's almost a visceral auditory experience when I hear something like that.
That is a very visual answer.
Joel, it's funny. I have a really visual answer also.
Rachel, jump in then.
That just popped into my head. So hi, great to be with you all. Rachel Platinum, HR Consulting. We do people strategy work. And when I hear reactive learning, I think whack-a-mole. You know that game where we're solving the problem in front of us, but we're not building capability or capacity for the future. We're just pounding this problem, looking for the next problem. So, little problem popping its head up, whack it down with training. It's not the solution like that.
That was very visceral as well.
So Kamaria Scott, Ematic, we improve organizational performance for people. And I think of firefighting. I think of firemen like hosing down one problem after the next, only for someone to be lighting a trash can on fire somewhere down the street. So I think of just constant firefighting.
I love all of these answers. I am head of Right for anyone who doesn't know Skill Masters Market, and I do learning and leadership development and competency models for nonprofits. I always compare it to the training factory. Like the request comes in, you fulfill the request. It's just the factory process. And I think it limits us when we find ourselves in that kind of mindset or mode. One of the things that I've shared, I feel like we need to stop referring to ourselves as learning designers because it implies that we will design a training. And so instead, thinking of ourselves as change agents or insert the word that feels more strategic to you, but we have the opportunity to be more strategic. And so even just how we refer to ourselves or how we think about our work makes a difference in how we show up. With that, I'm curious. Now, I work primarily with nonprofits. I know you guys have some experience in nonprofits and other sectors as well. Why do organizations default to reactive learning? Why do we just respond? Why are we playing whack-a-mole or putting out the closest fire when we have the opportunity to partner? And from your perspective, as you think about this, is this a learning and development issue? Like, is this an us issue or is it a systems issue? Like, what is it that causes us to show up and work in this way? And Yogi, I'll go back to you this time. We don't have to go to order at the same time every time.
I've been playing with this phrase a lot lately and doing some thinking around it. And that has to do with training is always viewed as important or development, but it's rarely seen as urgent. And what happens, especially in an operational mindset, is if it's not something that is usually a fire that needs to be put out, tag on to what Kamaria said, there's no priority to it. So everybody will say it's important, but when it comes to whether it's making money, if you're talking about a for-profit or staying solvent or delivering the service that is very passionate, that ground floor where the rubber meets the road type of world is where the priority is. And sometimes training is not positioned as something that's important to help that tire stick to the ground, to help you move forward. And I think that's key. One of the things that we face all the time in our world is being relevant, is getting that seat at the table. And sometimes you have the privilege and pleasure of working for an organization that understands that, and other times you don't. And I think the more we can tie, and I know Kamaria is going to agree to this, and I know Rachel as well, is the more we can tie it to the business, we tie it to what is that priority? What is the thing that they measure, and how do we attach the benefits to training to that, the better off we're going to be to make that a priority.
It might not be totally an L&D issue from what I'm hearing you say, but L&D has the ability to shift it. Okay. All right. Anybody want to agree or disagree? Jump in.
I'm going to add to that, and I'm going to say a couple of things that may seem a little weird. So first, I don't think that the HR function is properly staffed to be the strategic partner that it wants to be. So way back in the day, I know he's going to be like, not as old as me. I'm an old lady. I remember when, as an L&D professional, you owned end to end the process of going out, meeting the client, understanding the need, scoping the solution, building, facilitating. You owned it end to end. And what happened over time, so it started off to me as very strategic work. And then in the spirit of efficiency, we decided, it'd be even better if we just had designers and just had facilitators and just had whatever this is. And what happens is that you lose line of sight to why you're doing it. You've lost the connection back to the business, as Yogi has said. And what you've boiled it down to now is the delivery of an item. We just want to deliver the training. And the person who used to sort of have the strategic viewpoint of why we're doing the thing, we've almost cut that person out completely. And instead, we put a process in where a business partner says, can you give me this training? So, having worked for a ginormous organization that was staffed to say, before we do anything, we have a learning and performance consultant that will talk to you about your problem before we build a thing for you. That quite often is not seen, back to Yogi's point, as like a productive role, but it's an important role. So I think the advocacy of our function functioning the way it's supposed to is so critical to the work that we have to do, because what happens is that part in the beginning where we go and scope the need and understand and learn the business, it's nobody's job anymore. And so because it's nobody's job, it just turns into training requests. Please put in a ticket and we'll see what we can do about it. So that's my thought.
Yeah, we've shifted to like an intake form process in a lot of organizations, which eliminates the conversation. Rachel, what were you going to add?
I guess I interpreted the question a little bit differently. I don't disagree with what either of you have said, but I think that so many really strong, talented L&D professionals recognize that, unfortunately, people development is often one of the first things that is cut. And so when there is an ask reactively for something, they are all excited to prove we can do this. When in fact, learning really becomes strategic when we're thinking about where the organization needs to go, not what you want, but what you need, not where we've gotten burned, so we need to correct for it, but where we're getting out in front of it. And I don't want to pretend that they have the authority to do that all the time, that they have the budget to do that, that they have the leadership buy-in to do that. But because those are real systemic issues that need to be solved for. But I would like to see more L&D people actually asking those questions about, yes, we can deliver this because, yes, we do need to solve for this problem that is right in front of us, and we can do better. But how can we get in front of what the next issue is going to be? Business leader, help me tie to where the business is going. What is our strategy to get there? And how can we tie that in to build capacity and skills with our existing employees before we're turning around and being like, nobody knows anything. We need to hire all new people. And so on and so on and so on and so on.
Yeah.
So sorry if I took that in a different direction.
I think my point was that that's somebody's job. The thing that you're saying should be somebody's job. And having worked in organizations where, again, my role was to be the learning business partner. So to sit with you, to understand your business, to understand what you need, where you're going. Are you going to be hiring a different location? Are you getting ready to shift your business model? Like, what's happening? What happens, though, going back to your point about being the first to go, is people see that role and they're like, do we really need that? We don't need that. They can put in a ticket. The business knows what they need. They can put in a ticket. And so when you don't have someone whose job it is to be the person that says, hey, I would love to know, what is your business strategy for this year? Are you going to be moving to a different location? Are you going to be going from, hey, we sell portfolio, we only sold a product because we have a fantastic patent for it and we're going to be selling a portfolio? That means they need different sales skills. That's a whole person's job to be thinking proactively. And I think quite often, in the spirit of efficiency, because that person typically is not a producer, they're a thinker, sometimes that role is not valued and it's cut.
But how do we teach, coach, upskill? I hear you, and I want that to be a role. But how do we take your day-to-day professional who says, I want to be more strategic, and teach them to ask the questions? It's not their job, but like
Yeah.
you get away. Not only do you get ahead, but the organization gets ahead when you do things that are like not on the SOP of check the box, but just you're curious. That's my dream. I would like to insert the chip into every people, culture, HR, L&D professional. Ask them one more question, even if it's not your job. Just ask the question.
Yeah. I think we can get there. But I'm curious, as we make that transition, I'm going to ask you guys to fill in the blank for this one, because I don't know that we've painted a picture totally, right, of what it means to be strategic. So I don't know. It's an overused word in a lot of ways in learning and development. And so are we all meaning the same thing when we say it? Are we all thinking about the same thing? Are we picturing the same thing? So fill in the blank for this one, and then we'll dig a little deeper into this. Learning becomes strategic when?
It's aligned with the strategic intents of the organization and directly contributes to the overall success of those objectives. And when you can make those strong ties, when you can show the ROI benefits a bottom line, whatever is the bottom line that they're looking for, that creates that tie, that connection to the overall success of the organization.
Okay. If anybody is listening in, feel free to drop your answer in the comments as well. We'd love to see it.
I definitely agree wholeheartedly with Yogi. The simple way of saying that just comes down to learning becomes strategic when it's tied to where the organization is going, not to where it's been.
Okay. Okay. Maria, what about you?
I would boil it down even more simple than that. I would say when it is aligned to a specific outcome. At the end of the day, what's it pointing towards? Very simply, I go back to when I worked for a startup and I was in my 20s and they were like, girl, we need to see your strategic plan. And I was like, what now? Because I didn't know what I was like, And at the end of the day, there was two things that needed to happen, right? We needed to improve our technical skills to sell the things we were selling. We needed to improve our leadership skills so that we would have a pipeline to backfill our center manager positions. It was very simple. And I think as long as you can point to the outcome of what you're trying to accomplish and you can walk backwards from that, you know where you're going, to me, that is strategic.
Do you wish you could connect with other nonprofit learning and development leaders? I know what it feels like to want someone to bounce ideas off of and to learn from, someone who really understands you and your work. Imagine if you could have a simple way to meet people in the field, ask questions, and share information. That's why I created the Nonprofit Learning and Development Collective, where nonprofit L&D, talent management, and DEI leaders can connect with each other quickly and easily in a virtual space. When you join this community, you will walk away with a new, diverse, and powerful network and a sounding board for your staff development needs. So if you're ready to exchange ideas and collaborate with your peers, come join the Nonprofit L&D Collective. What is the shift when we can do that? When we can align with strategy, we know the outcome we're focused on. We are going to produce something. We're good at that part. And then we're going to measure it and prove it. Like, what happens when we've been able to tie specifically to those outcomes? What changes?
Well, I think there needs to be something that's concurrent in this as well. And that is, and back to Kamaria was talking about, when us young people were starting in the business, sometime there was a shift to see that where people became absolutely just a cost center. And it kind of ties in what Rachel was saying about the reduction of these things when the chips are down. And we became a line item. The people became a line item. And I think I'm going to throw this back to the world that you live in, Heather, and you do such great work in. I preach to organizations, for-profit organizations, treat your people like volunteers, where you understand that every single person, that whether they're making coffee, whether they're sorting food, whether they're delivering meals, whatever it is from a nonprofit perspective, they are invaluable parts of that operation. And when they get lost on a line item in this huge ledger and they're seen as 30% off the board top, going to something that we don't see productivity on because it doesn't directly translate to the numbers, that's what's first to go. And I think, yes, we need to figure out what are those questions. But we also need to change the mindset. And Kamaria, it's part of your thing. People problem is a business problem. And when we can make those very strong connections and how, and Rachel, to answer your question, from me perspective is one key does not unlock every door, because every leader, every entrepreneur, every business owner, every C-suite owner has a different driver in them in terms of what they want to see. So I think to be really astute in our world and get that seat at the table is you really have to understand what drives that leader in that organization.
And I think what I would add to that is, and this is a growth area, I think, for a lot of us in HR is, and just broader than even learning and development, is that it's so important to be a student of your business, to understand whether it's profit or nonprofit, what are they trying to achieve overarchingly, and how do they make money, and what are the ins and outs of that? Because at the end of the day, like every leader you talk to wants to grow revenue. They want to grow market share. They want to retain customers. There's about 5 to 7 things that across the board are always going to be what they're pointing back to. And if you can understand that, then you can have a different conversation with the business about getting proactive. So if you translate again, we now want to sell telehealth. Why? Because we want more money. Right? We want to open a new line of business. We want to serve a different customer. We want to, whatever it is, understanding your business positions you to have a better conversation and to be a strategic partner and then say, I know where you're trying to go. I think building trust with the business line is so important because when they do understand that, you know what, they understand the business, they understand what we're trying to do. I think going back to Rachel's point, then it allows us to have that conversation, ask more questions, because now they have trust that we see the vision, we understand the mechanics of what it is, and now we're a value add to what they are trying to accomplish. But without knowing the business, and sometimes we are very contained in what our business is, it limits our ability to have the conversations and earn the trust that give us that seat at the table.
Yeah. So there's no chip, unfortunately, Rachel. We all would like that, but that's what I'm hearing. There's no chip. But, I think, Maria, to your point, right, there are some common things that we can learn about, we can educate ourselves on to help us navigate the quote unquote business, even in the nonprofit. And then, Yogi, to your point, understanding the unique context or unique leadership within each organization. And if we can tie all of those things together, there are things that we can do. There are skills that we can build. There are things we can learn. There are actions we can take to become more strategic. We talked a little bit about what happens when we make that shift. What happens when we don't? What happens when we stay reactive? What's the cost of that?
You never get ahead. And that's the problem. If you think you're in a race and and the people that are in the front of the race are the ones that are leading and the innovators and they're ahead of the game, your entire time is spent catching up. So by the time you catch up to them, they're already 20 yards ahead of you. So you are being reactive. You are not getting ahead. You're just filling the holes that have already been dug and you're not digging any new holes in a positive way. And that's where that traction comes in. I think you need to understand, look, you don't want to make business and financial decisions that are always putting you in a position where you're catching up. Well, the competency and level of productivity and the culture, whatever in the organization that you want to improve, it's the same thing. How do you stay on top of that and stay in front of it and not always losing from behind, not catching up to where you need to be?
A former boss of mine used to say, you pay either way. You're either going to pay to upskill and stay ahead, or you're going to pay because you have regrettable turnover, or you're going to pay because you're losing business because you're not staying up with the market, or your employees are not as engaged and they're not feeling valued, or a weak manager that you know is a weak manager is going to stay a weak manager. You pay either way. And I can't tell you how many times that pops back into my head. So do you want to pay in the way that you can, as a leader, control it and guide it towards the positive outcomes? Or do you want to pay, but you don't get to pick the timing? You don't get to pick what way the penalty, punishment, whatever it is, comes at you? You pay either way. It's like, it's really true.
I wish I had like an applaud emoji somewhere. So there are real costs, I think, both to the individual, to the organization when this happens. And I feel like, you guys feel free to jump in. I've been in L&D for about 20 years, and I feel like we've been talking about this for pretty much the entire time, right? Like, oh, we need to be more strategic. We need a seat at the table. I don't think it's a motivation issue necessarily. I don't think it's a knowledge issue because we know we want to be there. We've been told how to get there in theory, right? What is it that keeps us reactive? And like, if you could tell somebody one thing to do like today that would just make us one step, 1% better, one step closer, what would you tell people to shift? What would you tell people to do?
I'm going to go back to what Kamaria said. Speak the business language. Talk about mission impact, profitability, ROI. Don't talk about training hours or compliance. Don't talk about this is great for culture building. Just get in there, bring the hard data, bring a plan, but like speak in the language that the business leaders can hear.
Yeah.
And you
Yeah.
can only do that if you've asked the questions, like she said, like all of us have said. But like she said earlier, you can only do that if you're curious, if you're asking the questions, even if it's not your job, if you're learning about the business and where it thinks it's going, if you're aligning with the strategic plan. Like, just speak the business language.
Yeah. Yeah. And to speak the business, you need to know the business. I think, what has separated companies for me is ones that made, and I want to take this off of L&D themselves because it's not always L&D's responsibility, but I have worked for companies that have made it a part of, well, I'm going to walk that back because that's typically still us, who have made it their priority to, when an employee onboards, there's a business of the business class, right? I think about companies that I have joined that I'd separate, the ones who I think do it well and have very successful learning, departments are the ones who first invest in making sure that everyone understands how the business makes money, right? And again, as an L&D person, I go back to my peas and carrots story because it was one of the things that was very pivotal in my career in that in reporting to a COO instead of a CHRO, the first thing he made me do was go to distribution centers and go to stores and talk to directors. I could not do anything until I could speak their language.
Yeah.
And that was such a helpful thing because when I would go and talk to them about fuzzy things, right, I'd be like, engagement. What I would really say is, well, do you want them to sell more peas or carrots or not? Because if they don't like it or you, they're less likely to walk people to the kumquats than somebody else. And this store over here is always walking people to the kumquats. Let's talk about it, right? Now we're having a different conversation than like what their engagement scores are because they don't, I don't say they don't care, but like it's not in their language because they are evaluated on store sales.
They care about kumquats.
They care about kumquat. So if we own the function as a leader in L&D, my job is to make sure that everyone on my team, in addition to their technical work, understands the context within which they work and can go have a conversation with a leader about why is this really important. And the downside to that, and I think the real risk to us, is technology, right? Again, going back to being an old lady, when we started being like, well, we could just do an e-learning. That'll work, right? But did it work or was that for compliance? Right. And so being able to say, well, absolutely, if we need to record training hours so that the people won't come in and smack our hands because nobody did the regulatory thing, it's a perfect example. If we would like to improve decision-making, behavior change, and adoption, Perhaps not. And it seems like the problem that you're solving for and the growth that you need require these types of things. So I think as when we become leaders, going back to the shift, we have to make sure that not only do our employees have technical skill, but they have enough skill of understanding the content with that skill lives to talk about it in a way that's effective for the business.
Love that.
I know we're running out of time. That I don't want to put a sour note on it, but this is more of a PPA. And the comment you made, Heather, was a little scary,
Oh gosh.
but it was absolutely true. I've been in this business 30 plus years. We're asking the same damn question. 30 years. And you're right. What is the answer? Maybe it may be learning and development's meaning of life question. But the CTAs, maybe we're asking the wrong question.
Yeah.
Because if we can't seem to find the answer that will stick, and that literally we're in this room talking about reactive learning or reactive development, and literally the industry has been reactive forever. Maybe the next call, the next podcast is, okay, what are the new questions we need to ask? And maybe not keep digging the same hole deeper.
Yeah.
Because it does get frustrating. I mean, I'm on podcasts all the time, and a lot of times we talk about the same thing. Why don't we get traction? Why don't they understand? Why? And it just becomes it's almost rote, with some of the challenges that we're facing. So maybe there is a new question we need to be asking. I don't know what is.
Well, Yogi, I will use that also to just plug the Learning for Good Summit that's coming up. Our entire conversation, we have 4 or 5 sessions, I can't remember, over the course of a day. And everyone is focused on this issue. How do we become more strategic? I think we have to move forward from just talking about it. And so it's panel discussions, it's roundtables, it's like, let's dig in and figure this out together. So yes, I think it can't end here. It has to continue, but we have to move forward instead of just talking about it, to your point. Well, with that, thank you all for joining me today for this LinkedIn Live. Thank you for sharing your perspectives. This is such an amazing group. I have so much respect for each of you. And so I'm glad that we were able to get on and do this together.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Hey friend, was this episode helpful for you? Did you like what you heard? Do you want more content like this? Here are 3 things you can do. Hit subscribe. Leave a review on Apple Podcasts or your podcast app of choice. Share this episode with a colleague. This means so much to me personally. I read every review, but it also helps me learn what content you like most so I can create more of what you want. All right, turn that Teams or Slack chat back on when you're ready, and I'll see you next time on Learning for Good.